Hi, my name is Steve Stein from Lessonface.com, and I'd like to finish up this series by just trying to explain to you a little bit more about the modes and how you're going to apply that to your fretboard. But before doing that, I want to sort of explain some of the misconceptions that people have a little bit about these 3-note per string or modal shapes. What I want to do first is I just want to remind you, for instance, if we go back to your original minor pentatonic. So if we were looking at A minor pentatonic, for instance, we'd have our first position. And of course, within that position, if we were playing in the key of A minor, and the chord was A minor, or we were playing over blues or whatever, your emphasis pitch, of course, at this point would be A. And there's multiple other things that you could emphasize, but that primary note is A. Now, when we move to the second position, we're playing a shape that looks different than the first position, obviously, but the primary note is still A. So as we move up, we're still trying to find the A's, and again, we can emphasize other things, but if we think about just the concept, the A is still the most important note in that second position. If we move to the third position, the A is still the most important note. So what I want you to think about is how when we talk about pentatonic positions, we call them generally like position 1, position 2, position 3, 4, and 5. And it's pretty self-explanatory to most people. You know, as you move through there, you're going to keep looking for A's. You're going to keep trying to emphasize those. And again, to reiterate the same thing, of course you're going to emphasize other things, but A is that primary note. When we get to the diatonic shapes, what gets confusing for people is we start labeling the first shape that we learn how to play major Ionian. And then we label the second shape Dorian and the third shape Phrygian and so on, and it gets very confusing for people. So the first thing I want to do right now is I want to just kind of show you how I'm going to play it in the key of G major here. I'm going to play the G major spread fingering. And what I want you to see is how, if you look at the video from last time, if we were in the key of G, we'd have the chords G major, A minor, B minor, C major, D major, E minor, and then F sharp diminished. And then it goes back to G again. So with those root notes that create those chords that we did in the last series, what we're going to do is we're just going to keep going with this scale shape. So we have Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do, which is the major scale. Okay, now we can continue playing through that shape to create more octaves, obviously. Now, usually what I'll do is I'll teach this all the way through the first string as well, so you're playing 5, 7, and 8. But then, of course, always remembering that your 8 on the second string here is your G or your root. Right there, so that's what you're looking for. Okay, so we call that the first position. We call it the major position. But what I want you to think about is how that, just like your pentatonics, that scale shape is movable wherever you want to go. So if you wanted to be in the key of C, you could simply move that scale shape up to the 8th fret and play the exact same thing, okay? Now, what we want to do next is we want to add on the second position, and we're going to include all the positions for you to practice, but I want to talk about the second position because I only have a limited amount of time here. So the second position, I obviously, just like pentatonic, I can't start on G again. I've got to shift up. So this is the same notes, but it's going to look a little different, just like the pentatonic does. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start off on A, play B, play C, D, E, F sharp, and G. So I have. Now we're going to keep going through that. So your second position is going to look like 5, 7, 8, 5, 7, 9, 5, 7, 9, 5, 7, 9, 7, 8, 10, and 7, 8, 10. Now, where it gets confusing a lot of times is people refer to that second position as Dorian. Now, we know from the discussion last time that Dorian really just means 2. So if you said you were in the key of A Dorian, what that means is you're really in the key of G major, but you're emphasizing the note and the note A in the chord A minor, which is absolutely true. But the confusion happens because people begin to misinterpret what's actually happening on the guitar here. What I want you to think about is you could be in this first position, which is G major, and I'm emphasizing G. I could still be in that first position and emphasize A's. I would just change the note that I'm trying to target within my scale. So as I play, instead of making the sounds of G, I'm going to start trying to target the A's in that shape. Whatever it is I would be doing. So when I move into the second position, instead of always thinking, well, if I move to that, if I want Dorian, I have to play this second position, what I want you to start thinking about, if this makes sense, when you look at your fretboard pentatonically, you have 5 positions that enable you to go anywhere you want on the fretboard with complete freedom. And we talked about adding in ninths and adding in sixes and all sorts of different things. And you're just adding that to that skeletal pentatonic system, but it still enables you to be able to move freely across the guitar, targeting whatever notes you're trying to emphasize. What I want you to think about is how we could take the 7 shapes that exist on our fretboard diatonically, and how you could move freely through those 7 shapes, emphasizing anything that you want. So for instance, G major and A Dorian and B Phrygian and so on are the same scale. They're the same notes, they're the same chords. The only difference is whatever it is that you're emphasizing. So what I want you to do is, instead of looking at your fretboard as this one position is Ionian or major, and this position is Dorian, and this position is Phrygian, and so on, I want you to visualize all 7 shapes across your fretboard, and then simply choose what you want to emphasize within that scale structure. So if you're in the key of G major, you could go anywhere you wanted to. And emphasize G's. You could use that exact same scale structure of G major, but emphasize the A's. And now it's going to sound like Dorian. You could use that exact same scale structure, exact same position, everything, but emphasize the B's, and it's going to begin to sound like B Phrygian. So now we'd have... See? So instead of just, again, assigning a mode to one shape, I'm gonna encourage you to think about memorizing all 7 shapes connecting together just like you did pentatonically. And then what you do is you go in there and you decide which note or which chord or whatever it is that you're looking for that you want to emphasize. And of course, the further you go down this modal rabbit hole, there's all kinds of different things that you can emphasize at different points in time. So an easy way of being able to kind of approach this is, the first thing you do is you just memorize all 7 shapes and you connect them. Now, maybe you only memorize 2 or 3 shapes to begin with, and you use those just like you might have done pentatonically. And then the trick is knowing the modes from the last video that I did. So for instance, if I said to you we were in G Dorian, okay? If we're in G Dorian, what key are we really in? And you should say F major. We're in F major. Well, then what you would do is you would take this whole sequence that you've just memorized, all these scale shapes that you've memorized, you take that first position and you put it on F. And then everything else connects just like you did pentatonically. So then if you want to play an F major, you'd emphasize the Fs and everything that's relative to that. If you wanted to play in G Dorian, you would still have the same scale structure, but you would now start trying to emphasize the Gs instead of the Fs. Okay? That way you're not, again, you're not segregating yourself to just certain elements of scale shapes. You're able to see the entire structure across your entire fretboard, and then you can just pick and choose whatever it is that you want. What was really confusing for me when I first started learning about modes was that I didn't understand, for whatever reason, I didn't understand that A Dorian was really part of a G major. I didn't understand that all those modes were actually just a major, but I was emphasizing something else along the way. So once you start realizing that, whenever somebody says Dorian or Phrygian or Lydian or Mixolydian or whatever, a really easy trick to do is just relate back to the major. What key are you really in? Right? What major scale are you really using when we're talking about modes? And once you relate it back to that initial major, then what you can do is you can just plant that on your fretboard and then put all the other positions, connect all of those on there, and then start exploring from there. So if you want to be in Mixolydian, that's no problem. But instead of just looking at your fretboard as Mixolydian, what might be real real convenient for you is to relate whatever mixolydian you're in. Let's say you're in D mixolydian. Okay? Well, D mixolydian is really the key of G. So you situate your fretboard as G major. So now you can see everything that you want. You're able to move around. You're able to meander, all of those kind of things. But then you're going to start emphasizing things more relative to the note D. Of course, that's where all the notes on the fretboard, which we've been studying all year, that's where that comes in, is knowing where those are. The further you know your theory, the more notes you have, the more pitches you can emphasize. I mean, there's just a million different things that you can get, but the number one problem with a lot of musicians is they just don't have a lot of availability on the fretboard. They're very limited. So, number one, it's easier if you always try and figure out what mode you're in and how that relates back to the original major. Once you establish what that major is, now you can set your fretboard up, set everything up, and then go in there and you can at least start playing in the proper scale, up and down all over the fretboard, but you can begin to emphasize the notes that you're really looking for. So I hope this series has helped you along the way. Obviously, there's so much more that we could talk about, and there's so many great places that you can go to find information, including, obviously, Lessonface and Guitar World. So have a wonderful holiday season, and I will speak to you soon.